The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Elise Carter pulled into the parking lot. Today was supposed to be special, her first day as the newest judge appointed to the county court. At 35, she was one of the youngest to ever hold the position, a fact that filled her with both pride and nervousness. She checked her watch, 7:15 a.m. She'd arrived early intentionally, hoping to settle into her chambers and review her first docket before the building filled with the usual hustle and bustle. The courthouse wouldn't officially open to the public until 8:30, but staff and officials could enter through the side entrance starting at 7. Elise grabbed her leather messenger bag from the passenger seat, taking a deep breath to steady herself. Inside the bag were her credentials, appointment letter, and a small framed photo of her grandmother, the first in their family to attend college, who had inspired Elise's journey into law. She had chosen to dress casually for her early arrival: dark jeans, a simple blouse, and a blazer. Her formal robes were already hanging in her new chambers, delivered the previous Friday. She would change when she got settled. The parking lot was mostly empty, with just a handful of cars belonging to early arriving staff and maintenance workers. Elise walked confidently toward the staff entrance, her low heels clicking against the pavement. The morning air felt crisp, carrying the promise of a fresh start. As she approached the side entrance, she noticed a uniformed officer she hadn't seen before standing guard. Officer James Winters had been with the courthouse security team for 12 years and prided himself on knowing every judge, clerk, and regular attorney by sight. When he spotted Elise walking purposefully toward the restricted entrance, his posture stiffened. "Excuse me, ma'am," he called out, his voice carrying a sharpness that made Elise pause. "Public entrance doesn't open until 8:30. You'll need to come back then." Elise smiled politely, continuing her approach. "Good morning, officer. I'm actually staff, the new judge appointed to courtroom 4B. I'm just heading in early to get settled." She reached for her bag to retrieve her credentials. Officer Winters stepped forward, blocking her path completely. His eyes narrowed as he looked her up and down. Right, a judge. His tone made it clear he didn't believe her. "And I'm the governor." Elise's smile faded, but she maintained her composure. She'd faced skepticism throughout her career, first as a public defender, then as an assistant district attorney, and later as a respected attorney in private practice. But she hadn't expected it quite so blatantly on her first day on the bench. "I understand your confusion," she said evenly, pulling her ID and courthouse credentials from her bag. "I'm Judge Elise Carter. I was appointed last month by the governor to fill Judge Richardson's seat after his retirement." Officer Winters barely glanced at the credentials she held out. "Look, lady, I know every judge in this courthouse, and you're not one of them. Maybe you've got an appointment or something, but you need to use the public entrance when it opens. Now please step back." A few early arriving clerks walked past, eyeing the interaction with curiosity but continuing inside after flashing their badges to another security officer at the door. "Officer," Elise tried again, her voice firm but still respectful. "I understand you're doing your job, but I am Judge Carter. If you call the Chief Justice's office, they can confirm my appointment. My chambers are already set up." "Listen," Winters said, his patience visibly thinning. "I don't have time for this. This entrance is for authorized personnel only. Now step back from the door before there's a problem." Elise stood her ground. "There's already a problem, officer. I'm authorized personnel being denied entry to my workplace. I'd like to speak with your supervisor." Something in Winters' expression changed, a flash of anger mixed with indignation. "You don't give the orders here," he snapped. "I told you to step back." He moved forward suddenly, his hand outstretched to physically block her, but the movement was more forceful than necessary. His open palm struck Elise's shoulder, knocking her off balance. She stumbled backward, her bag slipping from her grasp and spilling its contents across the pavement. A small crowd had begun to gather, courthouse staff arriving for work. Watching uncomfortably as the scene unfolded, Elise caught herself before falling, steadying herself against a concrete planter. "This is completely unacceptable," she said, her voice shaking slightly, more from anger than fear. "You have no right to put your hands on me. You have no right to try forcing your way into a restricted area," Winters countered, stepping closer again. "Now back up before I have to place you under arrest for trespassing." Elise knelt to gather her scattered belongings, her appointment letter, calendar, pens, and the now cracked frame holding her grandmother's photo. The glass had splintered across the image of the elderly woman in her graduation cap and gown. "Do you typically physically assault women who are trying to go to work?" she asked quietly, not looking up as she collected her things. "I didn't assault anyone," Winters retorted loud enough for the onlookers to hear. "I'm maintaining courthouse security, something I've done successfully for 12 years without any complaints." A well-dressed older man emerged from the small crowd that had formed. Henry Douglas, the courthouse's Chief Justice for the past decade, had arrived earlier than usual for a breakfast meeting with the county commissioners. "What's happening here?" he asked, his authoritative voice cutting through the tension. Officer Winters straightened immediately. "Just a small security issue, Your Honor. This woman was trying to enter through the staff entrance. Claims she's a judge." Chief Justice Douglas looked past the officer to where Elise was still gathering her belongings. His face broke into a warm smile of recognition. "Judge Carter, there you are. I was hoping to catch you before your first docket." He moved past Officer Winters, extending his hand to help her up. "I see you're getting an early start on your first day." The color drained from Officer Winters' face as the Chief Justice turned to address the small crowd that had gathered. "For those who haven't heard, Judge Elise Carter joined our bench this week after her appointment by the governor last month. She'll be taking over Judge Richardson's docket in courtroom 4B. She comes to us with an impressive record as both a prosecutor and defense attorney, and we're fortunate to have her." He looked directly at several of the staff members. "Please make sure everyone knows to welcome her properly." Elise stood, clutching her reassembled bag, the broken picture frame tucked carefully inside. Despite the humiliating encounter, she straightened her shoulders and nodded professionally. "Thank you, Chief Justice Douglas. I was just explaining to the officer that I arrived early to review today's cases before court begins." Officer Winters stood frozen, his face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and dawning horror as he realized his mistake. His eyes darted between the Chief Justice and the woman he had just physically pushed, the woman who was indeed the newest judge appointed to their court. I wasn't informed," he stammered. I didn't receive any notification about a new judge starting today." The Chief Justice's expression cooled noticeably. "The announcement was posted in the staff bulletin 2 weeks ago, Officer Winters, and Judge Carter's credentials appear to be in order." He glanced at the ID still clutched in Elise's hand. "There seems to have been a serious lapse in judgment here." Several more staff members had stopped to witness the scene, whispering among themselves. Elise could feel their eyes on her, her first impression to her new colleagues now tainted by this confrontation. "Perhaps we could continue this discussion inside," she suggested, conscious of the growing audience. "I'm sure Officer Winters was simply being thorough in his security protocols." The words felt hollow even as she spoke them, but years in the courtroom had taught her the value of de-escalation and professional courtesy, even when it wasn't deserved. The Chief Justice nodded, though his expression remained stern. "Of course. Officer Winters, I expect you to report to administration after your shift. Judge Carter, let me show you to your chambers. I believe the clerk has already delivered your first docket." As they walked through the now open door, Elise could hear the murmurs behind them, could feel Officer Winters' stare burning into her back. Her first day had barely begun, and already she faced a choice. How to respond to this incident, what message to send to the courthouse about who she was, and how she would handle conflict. The door closed behind them with a heavy click as they entered the courthouse's cool interior. The Chief Justice began apologizing profusely, but Elise's mind was already elsewhere, on the broken photo in her bag, on the cases waiting on her desk, and on the officer who had judged her unfit to enter based on nothing but a glance. She had worked too hard to let this define her first day. Whatever came next would be on her terms, not his. But as the adrenaline of the confrontation began to fade, she couldn't help wondering how many other misunderstandings she would face in the halls of justice she had sworn to uphold. The Chief Justice walked Elise through the courthouse's marble hallways, their footsteps echoing against the high ceilings. The building was gradually coming to life as more staff arrived, many glancing curiously at the new judge being escorted by their boss. "I cannot apologize enough for what happened out there," Chief Justice Douglas said, his voice low and concerned. "Officer Winters has been with us for years. I've never witnessed this kind of behavior from him before. Elise nodded, keeping her expression neutral despite the emotions churning inside her. "These things happen," she said simply, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. These things happen to some people far more than others. They rounded a corner and approached a polished wooden door with a freshly mounted nameplate, Judge Elise Carter. Seeing her name there, official, permanent, should have been a moment of pure triumph. Instead, it was now tangled with the humiliation she'd just experienced. "Here we are," Douglas said, pushing the door open. "Your chambers. I hope you'll find everything in order." The room was spacious and well-appointed, with tall windows letting in the morning light. A heavy wooden desk dominated the center, flanked by bookshelves already stocked with legal volumes. A separate door led to a private bathroom and a small closet where her judicial robes hung waiting. "It's perfect," Elise said, setting her bag down and trying to reclaim some of the excitement she'd felt earlier that morning. "Thank you." Douglas lingered by the door, clearly uncomfortable. "Judge Carter, about what happened. There will be consequences. That kind of conduct cannot be tolerated." Elise turned to face him. "What exactly will those consequences be?" "Well, there will be a disciplinary hearing, of course. Potentially a suspension, depending on the findings. Officer Winters has a clean record until now, but what happened was completely unacceptable." Elise walked to her desk, running her fingers along the polished surface. "A clean record," she repeated softly. "I wonder how many incidents simply went unreported." "What do you mean?" Douglas asked, though his shifting posture suggested he understood perfectly well. "Chief Justice, you and I both know what happened out there wasn't just about a failure to read a staff bulletin." She turned to face him directly. "Officer Winters took one look at me and decided I couldn't possibly be a judge. When I insisted otherwise, he became physical. That's not a misunderstanding, that's prejudice in action." Douglas sighed heavily. "You're probably right. But proving intent is always difficult in these situations." "I'm not interested in proving anything," Elise replied. "I'm interested in addressing the underlying problem. One officer's suspension won't change the culture that made him feel entitled to act that way." Before Douglas could respond, a light knock came at the open door. A woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair and an armful of files stood in the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt," she said. "I'm Beverly Wilson, your judicial assistant. I have your docket for today whenever you're ready." Douglas seemed relieved by the interruption. "Beverly's been keeping our courts running smoothly for 20 years. You're in good hands." He headed for the door. "I'll leave you to prepare for your first day on the bench. We'll talk more about the other matter later." After he left, Beverly entered the room fully, placing the files on Elise's desk with practiced efficiency. She hesitated, then said, "Word travels fast around here. I heard what happened at the entrance." Elise sighed. "I suspected it would. For what it's worth, most of us are horrified," Beverly continued. "And not everyone here is like Officer Winters." "I know," Elise said, offering a small smile. "I've worked in enough courthouses to know there are good people everywhere. And there are people like Officer Winters everywhere, too." Beverly nodded, then gestured to the files. "Your first case is at 9:30. It's a sentencing hearing, the Donaldson case. All the details are in there. Your robe is hanging in the closet. Anything else you need before I get back to my desk?" "Actually, yes," Elise said. "Could you find out who supervises the courthouse security team? I'd like to have a word with them before any formal proceedings begin." Beverly looked surprised but nodded. "That would be Chief of Security Thomas Richards. His office is on the first floor near the main entrance. I can see if he's available." "Thank you, Beverly. And could you also bring me some tape? I need to fix something before court begins." After Beverly left, Elise pulled out the broken picture frame from her bag. The glass had shattered, but the photograph inside was undamaged. Her grandmother at 72 wearing her college graduation cap and gown, her face beaming with pride and accomplishment. It had taken her 50 years to complete her degree, working as a housekeeper while raising children and then grandchildren. "What would you do, Grandma?" Elise whispered, carefully removing the photo from the broken glass. 20 minutes later, with the photo taped temporarily to a clean piece of cardboard and placed prominently on her desk, Elise had changed into her judicial robes and was reviewing the Donaldson case when another knock came at her door. A stocky man in his 60s with a security badge stood in the doorway. "Judge Carter?" "Thomas Richards, Chief of Security. Your assistant said you wanted to see me." "Please come in, Chief Richards," Elise said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Richards entered but remained standing, his posture rigid. First, I want to extend my deepest apologies for what happened this morning. Officer Winter's conduct was completely unacceptable. Yes, it was, Elise agreed. But I didn't ask to meet with you to receive apologies. I want to understand how your security team operates, specifically how officers are trained to identify courthouse personnel. Richards blinked, clearly not expecting this approach. Well, new judges and high-level officials are normally introduced during our weekly security briefings. Unfortunately, the announcement about your appointment came during a period when Officer Winters was on vacation. He returned just yesterday. That explains the lack of recognition but not the escalation, Elise said. I showed him my credentials. Richards shifted uncomfortably. No excuse there, Your Honor. He should have verified them properly. And the physical contact? Completely against protocol. We're trained to maintain a security perimeter without making physical contact unless there's an immediate threat. Richards shook his head. He knows better. Elise leaned forward slightly. Chief Richards, I've been a prosecutor and a defense attorney. I know when someone is protecting a colleague rather than addressing the real issue. So let me be clear. I'm not looking to end Officer Winters' career, but I am looking for genuine accountability and change. What exactly are you suggesting, Judge Carter? First, I want to know if there have been other complaints about Officer Winters or other security officers showing bias in how they treat people entering the courthouse. Richards hesitated. There have been concerns raised by some public defenders about their clients being treated differently than the DA's witnesses. Nothing official, just comments. Elise nodded. I suspected as much. Here's what I propose. Rather than simply punishing Officer Winters, I want a comprehensive review of your security training protocols, with special emphasis on implicit bias, and I'd like to be involved in that process. With all due respect, Your Honor, security protocols fall under administrative jurisdiction, not judicial. You're absolutely right, Elise agreed. I have no authority to order such changes. But as someone who was just physically pushed away from my workplace because of how I was perceived, I believe I have valuable input to offer.
Don't you?
The security chief considered this, then slowly nodded. I can bring your proposal to the administrative committee. It might actually be well received. There's been talk about updating our training for years, but it keeps getting pushed to the back burner. Thank you, Elise said. And as for Officer Winters specifically, I understand there will be a disciplinary hearing. Yes, scheduled for tomorrow morning. I'd like to attend, Elise said. Not to push for punishment, but to share my perspective on what happened and what should come next. Richards looked surprised again. That's unusual, but I don't see why not. Good, Elise said, rising from her desk. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a court session to prepare for. After Richards left, Elise stood alone in her chambers, feeling the weight of the judicial robe on her shoulders. Her first official act hadn't been banging a gavel or issuing a ruling. It had been standing her ground after being literally pushed aside. She glanced at her grandmother's photo. Different battlefield, same fight, right, Grandma? At 9:25, Beverly knocked again. It's time, Judge Carter. The courtroom is ready. Elise took a deep breath, gathered her files, and headed for the door. As she walked down the corridor toward courtroom 4B, she noticed people watching her, some with curiosity, others with newfound respect, and a few with what seemed like concern. News had definitely spread. She paused outside the courtroom doors, hearing the murmur of voices inside. Her first case awaited, but her mind briefly flashed back to Officer Winters' face, the shock when he realized who she was, the fear that had replaced his earlier contempt. She wondered what he was thinking now, as he finished his shift and faced the consequences of his actions. All rise, came the bailiff's voice as she entered the courtroom. The Honorable Judge Elise Carter presiding. As everyone stood, Elise took her place on the bench, looking out at the attorneys, defendants, witnesses, and observers. Today marked the beginning of her judicial career, complicated start and all. How she handled what came next would set the tone for everything that followed. Good morning, she said, her voice clear and steady. You may be seated. Court is now in session. The next morning, Officer James Winters sat alone in a small conference room, waiting for his disciplinary hearing to begin. He'd barely slept, replaying yesterday's incident in his mind over and over. His uniform felt too tight around his neck, and he kept adjusting his collar nervously. The door opened and 3 people filed in. Thomas Richards, the chief of security. Patricia Lopez from Human Resources, and William Taylor, the courthouse administrator. Their faces were serious as they took seats across from him. "Officer Winters," Taylor began, "this hearing concerns your conduct yesterday morning at the staff entrance, specifically your interaction with Judge Elise Carter. Do you understand why we're here?" Winters nodded stiffly. "Yes, sir. We've reviewed the security camera footage and taken statements from witnesses," Taylor continued. "Before we proceed, do you have anything you'd like to say about what happened?" Winters cleared his throat. "I made a mistake. I didn't recognize Judge Carter and I reacted poorly. I take full responsibility." Richards leaned forward. "James, you didn't just react poorly. You physically pushed a courthouse judge after she identified herself and showed you credentials. Can you explain why you escalated to physical contact?" Winters shifted uncomfortably.
She kept trying to enter and I was concerned about security.
"I wasn't trying to push her, just block the entrance. The video clearly shows you making contact with her shoulder, causing her to stumble backward," Lopez pointed out. "That goes beyond blocking an entrance." Winters looked down at his hands. "I didn't mean to push that hard. It was just instinct." "Instinct," Richards repeated. "In 12 years, I've never seen you instinctively put hands on anyone else trying to enter without proper recognition. What made this situation different?" The question hung in the air. Winters knew what they were asking, what they were implying, but he wasn't ready to admit it even to himself. Before he could formulate a response, there was a knock at the door. Taylor called out, "Come in," and all eyes turned as Judge Elise Carter entered the room. Winters felt his stomach drop. He hadn't expected her to be here. "Judge Carter," Taylor said, rising quickly. "We weren't expecting you." "I asked to attend," she replied calmly. "Chief Richards approved my request yesterday. I hope that's not a problem." "No, not at all," Taylor said, though he looked slightly flustered. "Please have a seat." Elise took the remaining chair, placing a small notepad on the table in front of her. She wore her judicial robes today, the black fabric stark against her composed expression. She nodded briefly to Winters, who couldn't bring himself to meet her eyes. "We were just discussing Officer Winters' actions yesterday," Taylor explained. "Specifically his use of physical force." "I see," Elise said. "And what does courthouse policy say about such use of force?" Lopez from HR answered. "Security personnel are only authorized to use physical contact if there's an immediate threat to safety, or if someone actively resists lawful commands after clear warnings." "Was I posing an immediate threat?" "Officer Winters?" Elise asked, addressing him directly for the first time. Winters looked up, finally meeting her gaze. "No, Your Honor." "And did I actively resist after clear warnings?" "No, Your Honor, you were persistent about entering but not aggressive." He took a deep breath. "I overreacted. I apologize." "Apology noted," Elise said, her voice neutral. "But I'd like to understand why you overreacted." Winters looked to his superiors, hoping for some intervention, but they were clearly waiting for his answer too. I've been working that entrance for years. I know all the judges by sight. When you approached," he trailed off. "When I approached, you made assumptions," Elise finished for him. "You saw a black woman in casual clothes claiming to be a judge, and you decided I was lying. Even when I showed you my credentials, you refused to verify them properly." "Why?" The blunt assessment made Winters flinch. "It wasn't because you're black," he protested quickly. "Then what was it?" Richards pressed. Winters struggled to find words. You didn't look like a judge to me." "And what does a judge look like, Officer Winters?" Elise asked quietly. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Taylor cleared his throat. "Judge Carter, while we appreciate your input, we need to discuss appropriate disciplinary measures. Given the seriousness of this incident, we're considering a 2-week suspension without pay, along with mandatory retraining." Elise turned to Taylor. "May I offer an alternative?" The three administrators exchanged glances before Taylor nodded. "Of course. I believe suspension alone won't address the real issues here," she began. "What happened yesterday wasn't just about one officer's mistake. It was about systemic problems in how security operates and how bias influences those operations." She opened her notepad. "I've drafted a proposal. Instead of a suspension, I suggest Officer Winters spend those 2 weeks in a different kind of training. First, shadowing public defenders to understand the barriers their clients face when entering this courthouse. Second, working with community outreach programs in neighborhoods that have historically distrusted our judicial system. Winters stared at her, confusion evident on his face. "You're not pushing for me to be fired?" "Firing you doesn't solve anything," Elise replied. "It just removes one person without addressing why the incident happened in the first place." She turned back to the administrators. "I also recommend a comprehensive review of security protocols and training for all courthouse personnel, with a focus on recognizing and addressing implicit bias." Taylor looked impressed. "That's a thoughtful approach, Judge Carter. But Officer Winters still needs to face consequences for his actions." "I agree," Elise said, "which is why I also recommend he be reassigned from entrance security to document processing for 6 months, after completing the training. That keeps him away from public-facing roles while he works on these issues without ending his career." Richards nodded slowly. "That could work. We've been short-staffed in document processing anyway." "Additionally," Elise continued, "I'd like Officer Winters to help develop new training materials based on what he learns during this process. His experience could be valuable in preventing similar incidents." Lopez jotted notes rapidly. "This is an unusual approach, but I don't see any policy reasons it couldn't work. With your permission, Mr. Taylor, I can draft the necessary paperwork." Taylor looked at Winters. "What do you say, officer?" "This is more involved than a simple suspension, but it also offers a path forward." Winters sat stunned. He'd come in expecting to be fired or severely disciplined. Instead, the very judge he'd disrespected was offering him a chance to learn and grow. It felt almost worse than punishment. It made him confront the reality of his actions in a way suspension never would. "Why?" he asked Elise directly. "Why would you do this after how I treated you?" Elise's expression softened slightly. "Because this isn't about you and me, Officer Winters. It's about making this courthouse work better for everyone who walks through those doors. Some come seeking justice, others to deliver it, but everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect." She paused. "Including you." Winters swallowed hard.
"I accept," he said quietly.
"And I truly am sorry, Judge Carter." "Then it's settled," Taylor declared. "Officer Winters, you'll begin this program immediately. Chief Richards will work out the details with Judge Carter." He stood, signaling the end of the hearing. "Thank you all." As they filed out of the room, Elise caught up with Richards in the hallway. "There's one more thing, Chief. The woman who takes the bus to clean these offices at night, does she use the same entrance I tried to use yesterday?" Richards looked surprised by the question. "Well, no. Cleaning staff use the service entrance on the other side of the building." "And why is that?" Elise pressed. It's just protocol. It's been that way for years." "I think that protocol needs revisiting too, don't you?" Elise suggested. "If we're truly addressing systemic issues." Richards nodded slowly, a new understanding dawning on his face. "I'll add it to the review, Judge Carter." "Thank you," Elise said, then headed toward her courtroom for the day's proceedings. Back in his office, Officer Winters sat alone, staring at the assignment paperwork. His pride was wounded, but something else was stirring too, a reluctant respect for Judge Carter and, more uncomfortably, the first glimmers of recognition about his own prejudices. He picked up his phone and, after a moment's hesitation, called his sister. "Hey," he said when she answered. "Remember those community workshops you're always trying to get me to attend at your church? The ones about bias and racial justice? Is there one coming up soon?" Miles away in her chambers during the lunch recess, Elise called her grandmother. "How's it going, my judge?" the elderly woman asked, pride evident in her voice. "It's challenging, Grandma," Elise admitted, "but I think I'm where I need to be." "Of course you are," her grandmother replied. "That's why it's challenging. Easy jobs don't change anything." Elise smiled, glancing at the temporarily repaired photo on her desk. "I had to make a tough call today about consequences versus change." "And you chose change," her grandmother guessed. "I did," Elise confirmed. "I'm not sure if it was right, but it felt necessary." "That's how change works, baby," her grandmother said softly. "One necessary decision at a time." After hanging up, Elise opened her afternoon case files. The work of justice continued, both in her courtroom and hopefully throughout the courthouse halls. 3 weeks had passed since the incident at the courthouse entrance. The initial shock and gossip had gradually faded as the daily business of the court system resumed its steady rhythm. But beneath the surface, changes were slowly taking root. Officer James Winters sat in the back row of a community center meeting room, feeling out of place without his uniform. He'd spent the past 2 weeks shadowing public defenders and attending workshops as part of Judge Carter's alternative disciplinary program. Today marked his 5th community meeting in the predominantly black neighborhood of Pine Heights, just 3 miles from the courthouse but a world away in terms of residents' experiences with the justice system. The room was filled with about 30 local residents, most eyeing him with varying degrees of suspicion. They knew who he was, not him personally, but what he represented in his role as a courthouse security officer. At the front of the room, a community organizer named Darlene Washington was speaking about an upcoming Know Your Rights workshop. And remember, these sessions aren't just about knowing what to do if you're stopped by police, she explained. They're about understanding how to navigate the entire system, including the courthouse where many of you have felt unwelcome or worse. Several heads nodded in agreement. A middle-aged man raised his hand. My son had a hearing last month for a traffic violation, he said. He was wearing a suit, had all his paperwork, and they still made him wait outside in the rain while letting others in. Said there was a capacity issue, but the white folks kept going right in. Murmurs of recognition rippled through the crowd. Winters shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Recognizing the practice, security sometimes slowed entry during busy periods, but he'd never considered how the decisions about who waited and who entered might reflect bias. Darlene nodded. That's exactly the kind of experience we need to document and address. Which is why I'm pleased to announce that Judge Elise Carter from County Court has agreed to hold monthly listening sessions right here in our community center. Surprised whispers filled the room. Winters looked up sharply. A judge is coming here? Someone asked skeptically. What good will that do? Judge Carter isn't just any judge, Darlene replied. She's committed to making real changes in how the courthouse operates, especially for our community. And she's already started. Winters felt eyes turning toward him. Darlene continued. As some of you know, we have Officer Winters from Courthouse Security with us today. He's part of a new program Judge Carter initiated after an incident at the courthouse. The room fell silent as all attention focused on him. Winters' instinct was to defend himself or leave, but he remembered Judge Carter's words during the disciplinary hearing. This wasn't about him, it was about making the system better. He stood slowly. I'm here to listen and learn, he said simply. I made a serious mistake, and instead of just suspending me, Judge Carter thought it would be more useful if I understood how my actions and attitudes affect real people. He paused, finding it difficult to continue under their scrutiny. I didn't realize how many barriers already exist for people trying to access the courthouse. I didn't see it because I didn't have to. An elderly woman in the front row studied him for a moment. At least you're being honest, she said finally. That's something. Later, as the meeting broke up, Winters found himself approached by a teenager who'd been quiet throughout the discussion. My older brother has a court date next week, the boy said, his voice a mix of defiance and anxiety. He's nervous about going in. Says they always treat him like he's guilty just walking through the door. Winters wasn't sure how to respond. 3 weeks ago, he might have dismissed the concern or offered platitudes about security protocols. Now he found himself considering the kid's words more carefully. What's your brother's name? He asked. Anthony, the boy replied cautiously. Winters nodded. Tell Anthony to ask for me when he arrives. I'll make sure he gets through security without any problems. He pulled out a business card and wrote his direct number on the back. If I'm not at the entrance that day, call this number. I'll come find him. The boy took the card, surprise evident on his face. For real? For real, Winters confirmed. It's the least I can do. Across town, Judge Elise Carter was working late in her chambers, reviewing files for the next day's cases. A knock at her door interrupted her concentration. Come in, she called. Beverly, her judicial assistant, entered with a folder. The preliminary report from the Security Protocol Review Committee, she said, placing it on the desk. Chief Richards asked me to deliver it personally. Thank you, Beverly. Elise opened the folder, scanning the contents. The report outlined initial findings and recommendations for changes to courthouse security procedures, including standardized entry protocols for all staff regardless of position, mandatory bias training for security personnel, and a new complaint system for visitors who felt they were treated unfairly. They've incorporated most of your suggestions, Beverly noted. That's practically unheard of. These committees usually take months just to agree on meeting times, let alone actual changes. Elise smiled. I think recent events created a certain motivation for progress. Beverly lingered by the desk. People are talking, about how you handled the situation with Officer Winters. I expected they would, Elise replied, continuing to read the report. Some of the older judges think you were too soft, Beverly continued. They said making an example of him would have sent a stronger message. Elise looked up. And what do you think, Beverly? Beverly considered the question. I think punishment is easy. Change is hard, she shrugged. And I've worked here long enough to know which one actually sticks. Elise nodded appreciatively. Exactly. After Beverly left, Elise closed the report and leaned back in her chair. 3 weeks of presiding over her courtroom had been challenging but rewarding. She'd quickly developed a reputation for being fair but firm, thoroughly prepared, and willing to listen to all sides before ruling. But she knew her handling of the Winters incident had defined her more powerfully than any ruling she'd made so far. Her phone rang, an internal call from the courthouse. Lobby, Judge Carter speaking. Your Honor. It's Thomas Richards. I have someone here who'd like to speak with you if you have a moment. Who is it? She asked, checking her watch. It was after 6 p.m. Officer Winters, Richards replied. He just returned from a community meeting and asked if you were still in the building. Elise hesitated. She hadn't spoken directly with Winters since the disciplinary hearing. Send him up, she decided. A few minutes later, Winters stood in her doorway, looking different without his uniform, more human somehow, less rigid in khakis and a button-down shirt. Judge Carter, thank you for seeing me, he said. I just got back from Pine Heights. How was the community meeting? She asked, gesturing for him to take a seat. Eye-opening, he admitted, sitting across from her. They talked about experiences I never knew were happening. Or maybe I just never paid attention. He paused. A teenager approached me afterward about his brother coming to court next week. He's afraid of how he'll be treated. And what did you tell him? Elise asked, curious. I gave him my card. Told him to have his brother ask for me. Winters shook his head. It's such a small thing, but the look on that kid's face, like no one from the courthouse had ever offered to help before. Elise nodded. Sometimes small things make the biggest difference. That's actually why I'm here, Winters said, leaning forward. I've been thinking about your proposal, about me helping develop new training materials after this program. I want to do more than that. What did you have in mind? A regular presence at these community meetings. Not just me, but rotating courthouse staff, clerks, bailiffs, maybe even judges. People need to see us as humans, and we need to see them the same way. He hesitated. I know it sounds simple, but the best solutions often are, Elise interjected. I think it's an excellent idea, Officer Winters. I'd be happy to support it. Relief washed over his face. Thank you, Your Honor. As he stood to leave, Elise asked, What changed, Officer Winters? 3 weeks isn't a long time to shift perspective. He considered the question carefully. When you walked into that hearing, I expected anger. I deserved anger. Instead, you offered, I don't know what to call it, justice, Elise suggested. Real justice isn't about punishment. It's about restoration and growth. Winters nodded slowly. I'm starting to understand that. He moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I was wrong that morning. You look exactly like a judge should look. After he left, Elise remained at her desk reflecting on the conversation. The changes she was seeing were small, perhaps too small to transform an entire system built on centuries of inequality. But they were real changes nonetheless, rippling outward in ways she couldn't fully predict. Her phone buzzed with a text from her grandmother. Coming to Sunday dinner this weekend? Elise smiled and typed back. Wouldn't miss it. Got some good stories to tell. She gathered her files, preparing to head home for the evening. Outside her window, the courthouse square was quiet. The historic building bathed in the soft glow of early evening light. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new challenges, new opportunities to align the ideal of justice with its practice. It wasn't a perfect system, not yet. But for the first time in her career, Elise felt like she was in exactly the right place to help bend its arc in the right direction. Not just from the bench, but from every corner of the courthouse, including its gates. 6 months had passed since that fateful morning at the courthouse entrance. The summer heat had given way to autumn crispness, leaves turning golden on the trees surrounding the courthouse square. Inside the imposing building, Subtle but significant changes had taken root and begun to flourish. On this particular Saturday morning, the courthouse was technically closed, but its main hall buzzed with activity. Tables lined the marble floors, staffed by court clerks, public defenders, and various community organizations. Colorful signs announced a Courthouse Community Day, the first of its kind in the county's history. Judge Elise Carter stood near the main entrance, watching as families and individuals from across the county, particularly from underserved neighborhoods, flowed through the doors. Many looked hesitant at first, their body language revealing a lifetime of discomfort in this space. But they were being greeted with smiles, handshakes, and clear information about the services available today. Everything from free legal advice to assistance with record expungement applications, child support questions, and even voter registration. "Quite a turnout," remarked Chief Justice Douglas, appearing at Elise's side. "Your idea is proving quite popular." "It wasn't just my idea," Elise replied, nodding toward a table near the center of the hall, where Officer James Winters was explaining security procedures to a group of interested teenagers. "The Community Outreach Committee deserves most of the credit. The committee, a new entity formed in the wake of the incident 6 months ago, consisted of courthouse staff and community representatives working together to make the justice system more accessible and equitable for all county residents. Still," Douglas said, "none of this would have happened without your unique approach to that unfortunate incident." Elise watched as a young mother cautiously approached the information booth with a toddler in tow. The child was fussy, but the clerk behind the table immediately offered a coloring book and crayons while talking to the mother with undivided attention. "The courthouse should serve the people, not intimidate them," Elise said simply. "Sometimes it takes an unfortunate incident to remind us of that." Douglas nodded thoughtfully before being called away to another matter. Left alone, Elise circulated through the hall, stopping occasionally to chat with visitors and volunteers. She paused near the expungement clinic, where attorneys were helping people determine if their old criminal records could be cleared. Under state law, a middle-aged man had just received the news that his 15-year-old drug possession conviction could potentially be expunged. His eyes welled with tears as he shook the attorney's hand. "Do you know what this means?" he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I could finally apply for better jobs. I could volunteer at my daughter's school." He shook his head in disbelief. "I've been carrying this around for so long I stopped believing it could ever change." Elise moved on, her own conviction reinforced. The legal system had the power to burden people for decades, but also the power to lift those burdens when justice and mercy aligned. At the security information booth, Officer Winters was demonstrating the courthouse metal detectors to a group of curious children, explaining how they worked while being careful to make the experience educational rather than frightening. "And if you ever come to court with your parents," he was saying, "remember that the officers at the door are there to keep everyone safe, not to scare you. If you're nervous or have questions, you can always ask." When he spotted Elise, he excused himself and approached her. "Judge Carter, I wanted to show you something," he said, leading her to a side table covered with pamphlets. "The new visitor guides just arrived, translated into Spanish, Vietnamese, and Mandarin. And look," he pointed to a QR code on the back. "It links to video versions for people who prefer that format or have reading difficulties." "These look excellent," Elise said, picking one up and flipping through it. The guide explained court procedures in clear, simple language, with helpful illustrations and contact information. "The translations were actually my sister's idea," Winters admitted. "She pointed out that we had all these signs and instructions that only worked if you read English well." "Your sister sounds like a smart woman," Elise remarked. "She is," Winters agreed. "She's been right about a lot of things I should have listened to years ago." He hesitated, then added, "You know, my reassignment to document processing ends next week. Chief Richards asked where I want to go next." "And what did you tell him?" "I asked to stay on the Community Outreach Committee, but also to return to entrance security with a difference." His expression was earnest. "I think it matters who's at that front door and how they make people feel on their way in. I want to be part of fixing what I helped break." Elise considered him thoughtfully. 6 months ago, he had been defensive and resentful. Today, he spoke with genuine conviction. "I think that's an excellent choice, Officer Winters." As Elise continued her tour of the event, She found herself at a booth she hadn't noticed before, tucked in a corner of the main hall. A handwritten sign read, "Share your courthouse story." An older woman sat behind the table, a digital recorder and notebook in front of her. "Judge Carter," the woman greeted her warmly. "I'm Darlene Washington from the Pine Heights Community Center. We haven't formally met, but I've heard a lot about you." "Ms. Washington, it's a pleasure," Elise replied, recognizing the name from reports about the community meetings. "What's happening at this booth?" "We're collecting stories," Darlene explained. "Good ones, bad ones, everything in between, about people's experiences in this building. The idea is to create an oral history project that tracks how the courthouse has served or failed the community over time, and how things are changing." "That's fascinating," Elise said. "Whose idea was this?" "It grew out of those listening sessions you started," Darlene said. "People kept sharing powerful stories, and it seemed important to preserve them." She tilted her head. "Would you like to contribute your story, Judge?" Elise hesitated. "My story? About your first day," Darlene clarified. "It's become quite well known, you know. Not just what happened, but what you did afterward. It's given people hope that change is possible." Elise glanced across the hall where Officer Winters was now helping an elderly man navigate to the right booth. 6 months ago, they had been adversaries in a tense confrontation. Today they were colleagues working toward a common goal, changed in ways neither could have predicted. "Perhaps another time," Elise said. "Today should be about the community stories, not mine." Darlene smiled knowingly. "They're all connected, Judge Carter. That's the point of this project, to show how individual actions ripple outward." Later that afternoon, as the event wound down, Elise found herself standing on the courthouse steps, watching volunteers pack up tables and materials. Beverly appeared at her side, clipboard in hand. "By all measures, it was a huge success," Beverly reported. "Over 300 people attended. The legal aid attorneys saw 75 clients. 52 expungement applications were started. And the feedback forms are overwhelmingly positive." "That's wonderful," Elise said. "Let's plan another one for spring." Beverly made a note, then looked up with a smile. "Oh, and this came for you yesterday." She handed Elise a small package. "I forgot to give it to you with all the preparations." Elise opened it to find a beautiful wooden frame. A card inside read simply, "For your grandmother's photo. Thank you for teaching me what real justice looks like. Officer James Winters." That evening, as Elise placed her grandmother's photo in its new frame and set it on her desk at home, she reflected on the past 6 months. The changes at the courthouse weren't revolutionary or perfect. Old habits and biases still surfaced regularly. Some staff members resisted the new initiatives. Some community members remained skeptical, but something fundamental had shifted, not just in policies and procedures, but in relationships and perceptions. People from different worlds were talking to each other, listening to each other, working together to make the system more just. Her phone buzzed with a text from Beverly. "Channel 4 wants to interview you about today's event. Said they heard about a judge who's redefining justice in our county." Elise smiled and typed back, "Tell them I'm not redefining justice. Just trying to make sure we deliver on its original promise." She placed the phone down and gazed at her grandmother's photo, remembering what the elderly woman had told her on that difficult first day. "That's how change works, baby. One necessary decision at a time." 6 months ago, an act of prejudice had revealed deep flaws in the system, but it had also created an opening for transformation, proof that even painful moments could become catalysts for positive change. If met with wisdom instead of vengeance, bridge building instead of punishment, tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conflicts, new opportunities to choose between easy answers and necessary growth. But tonight, Elise allowed herself to celebrate how far they'd come. One decision, one conversation, one community day at a time.